Hello, friends. This is Bhuminathan, Director Kingmakers IAS Academy. Sir is having some technical issue. He'll be joining in another 2 to 3 minutes. So I request everyone to just be in the program. And whatever the doubts you are having, please you can text it, because apart from the topics which we have already shared with you, you'll be having a lot of doubts how to answer for most of the controversial topics. Here we have highlighted only very few topics. So it is better you can also just give your inputs. This session is designed in such a way that first sir will pick up some 5 major important issue which is very important in the national level out of this 15 topics. Sir will give you the different solution. Then he'll ask you the just your own questions and other things. So first he'll respond to all your questions. Finally, if time permits, he will also discuss the other left out questions already which we have shared. So sir has joined.
Yeah, I have joined.
Sir, very good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good evening, sir. Yes, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Madhavi?
Yes, sir.
Over to you.
Yes, sir. I'm happy to welcome Shri G. Balachandran IAS here for the session. He has done MPhil in Sociology and Masters in Dev Economics, and he was a former Chief Secretary of Government of West Bengal. He was a financial advisor to the Department of Space and Government of India, and he has been a consultant in World Bank and advisor in UNDP, and he has many feathers to his hat. And he has done a lot of debates in the news, maybe not for the Delhi, the Hindi students, you might be aware of his lectures, because it is in various reputed Tamil channels that he has done his debate on various administrative and political issues. So he has, having done all that, it is not new for him to get to know and give your opinion on a controversial topic. And he has a lot of achievements in hand. And here he is standing humble to mentor you guys and give out his lecture on controversial topics. Over to you, sir. We are very eager to wait for this session, sir.
Okay. Hi. Good evening to everybody. Now, basically, in this session, I will be dealing with how to answer questions that look very conflictive in nature, rather difficult. If you take either of the sides, you can be put into discomfort. Like one of those questions is, if the lawyer, he asks a husband, have you stopped beating your wife? If he asks him, now the husband can neither say yes nor no. Because if he says yes, I have stopped, that means I have stopped beating my wife, which means he has been beating his wife till that time. If he says no, it means I continue to beat my wife. So these are difficult questions, you understand? And such questions can be asked in your biography also. I'll first deal with the general idea of how to answer any question in biology. And then we will go to these difficult questions. Now, what is the objective of answering any question in biology? It is not to show your knowledge. It's not to show your expertise. It is to score maximum marks in the biology. That's the first thing. You are youngsters, you will have definitive views on many issues, and you will be so enthusiastic, to answer a question where you have very, very definitive views. The views can be extreme right or extreme left. The difficulty is, say you have extreme left views, because most of the youngsters are left of center. So you have extreme left views. The man who asks the question may be a person who is on extreme right. And therefore, this man will immediately become alienated from you. And to that extent, however right your answer is, you may still get less marks. So that defeats the fundamental objective of scoring as high as possible in the YOC. Okay, then what is the solution? Or do I go against my conscience? I know this is the right answer, and I don't answer it. I try to make up. I try to wriggle out of the situation. No. You see, when you enter your services, your seniors will tell you that most of the times you are not able to say yes to a demand put forward by a member of public. They will tell you your no should be so sweet that it almost appears an yes, but it will be a no. You should know how to say a no to a person, not very vehemently, not with a wry face, but in a very sweet, possible manner. So that's what you try to do in the interview also. There is nothing called white or black in the world. If you believe in God and Saturn, the only person who is totally white is God, and the only person who is totally black is Saturn. Then who are all others? We are shades and shades of gray. It's a difference in degree, if not in kind. It's a difference in degree. You may be 180 degrees, you may be 170 degrees white and 10 degrees black, and I may be 120 degrees white and 60 degrees black. So it's shades and shades of gray, all of us are. And therefore, when a question is asked, you analyze the question. You make it appear that you are adopting the golden mean path. Remember this word, adopting the golden mean path, the middle course. You make it appear. But while making it appear like that, you come out with the plus and minus of the issues concerned. Now, this is the most important thing. You see, when you find that a murderer, it's very clear that he has committed a murder. And therefore, the immediate reaction will be, oh, it was a gruesome murder, and therefore, he should be sentenced to death. That will be the immediate reaction. But if you look at the circumstances because of which he committed the murder, was it premeditated? Was it emotional on the spot? And was it provoked? Did he have every reason or most of the reasons to be completely provoked? And did it take place because of it? Now, if you consider all these facts, then you say, yes, a murder is a murder. It needs to be condemned. It needs to be punished. But the circumstances in this case, as made out to me, are as follows. And therefore, I would think that these factors should be taken into consideration when the sentence is imposed on the convict. This is what we say. Now, this appears to take a middle path, but it does not compromise your stand that the guilty should be punished. Nor does it compromise your stand that compassion need be exhibited by the arms of law when compassion is required. That we look at the totality of the situation. We do not look only at a murder. We also try to find out why and how, under what circumstances the murder took place. Okay. This is the basic issue. Now, this is the basic point you should remember. I have told you, don't get provoked by any question. Don't get provoked. Questions are asked at times to provoke you. Don't get provoked. Keep a smile and make it a fundamental issue within you that any question you will be analyzing the various aspects of the issue that is being raised in that question. And then you will also tell them. Now, all this should take place not by taking 10 minutes or 15 minutes for analysis. It should take place within a fraction of a second. If you have come to the conclusion that this is how you will approach an issue, then it is not difficult for you to do that analysis. After all of you are brilliant. Without brilliance, you would not have passed your main exam. So you have the necessary levels of IQ, and you will be able to, provided you take a policy decision. You take a policy decision that this is how I will approach an issue that is being raised through a question. For instance, farmers' agitation. Now, this is still current because they have decided after 6 months to continue. The farmers' agitation, there can be two views. The farmers, who are these farmers? Most of these North Indian farmers who are fighting for their cause. They have a tradition of sending their sons, daughters, son-in-laws, cousins, and nephews to the Indian army. And therefore, nobody can challenge or doubt their patriotism. And therefore, they still have an agitation running for almost 6 months. Therefore, there should be some reason why they agitate. And on the other hand, government. What is the basic intention of the government? It thinks that agriculture is a giant of opportunities, which is ill-utilized. The full benefits that can accrue from out of agriculture, namely increasing the income, etc., still has not been achieved in India. It's miserable. Even still not been. Even the optimal achievement is not there. Nearer to optimal achievement is not there. It's a fact. Therefore, government has a viewpoint. Farmer has a viewpoint. Government, when it says, therefore, suppose somebody asks you, what do you feel about this farmers' agitation? Do you think it is right? Are they justified in agitating? Your answer will be, sir, Indian agriculture is an area where potential economic benefits can be made available by integrating the agricultural land in question with the rest of India and rest of the world through proper economic decisions on marketing. No, this is the fundamental. This is what for government has decided to go for all the changes that they propose. Okay. Having said it, we should say, when such economic benefits are certainly available from the Indian agricultural field, which still has not been exploited to its full capacity, the farmers are asking a question, where will we be in sharing those economic benefits? Growth, development should be inclusive. It should certainly include the farmer who contributes the most in bringing the... Yes, Madhavi? Pardon? Okay, okay. I'll see what can be done. Okay, right, right. I am told that I speak very little, very, very slow. So let me see what I can do about it. You all should remember that I have left the government service and you are not very loud after leaving the government service. Madhavi, tell me, am I more audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In one-on-one session, you were audible. Yes, sir. Now, okay. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Vinith has said fine.
Okay, okay. So, you are touching upon a basic issue when you talk about the farmers' agitation. You are saying that development should be inclusive. Development should include every stakeholder. In agriculture, the farmer, the cultivator, and the landowner are important stakeholders. Now, their fear is that the solution, now remember this quotation. If you want, you record it. Their fear is the solution offered by the government will prove to be more problematic than the present problems. In the mandi, you have certain problems. There is dictatorship of certain people, there is corruption, etc. So all these need rectification. There is no doubt. But then what the government proposes for rectification, namely allowing the big industry to enter in, the farmers' fear is, we already have one example of this big industry in the sugarcane sector. The sugarcane barons, they haven't paid the dues of the farmers for decades. It's a fact. Farmers have agitated. They have appealed to government. They have gone to the court. Despite all this, they have not been able to get their due from the sugarcane farmers. So since they have one precedent, which is very disturbing to them, not that there is no contract farming in India, as such there is contract farming, but those who come to contract farming are almost equal to farmers in their economic or political or social strength. It will be easy for farmers to tackle them. When big industry comes, Their immediate apprehension is the big industry, we will not be able to fight against their might. And we already have an example in the sugar field. And therefore, what needs to be done is farmers will have to come down from their demand that all the three acts should be repealed. And the government should come down from their stand that this will be kept in abeyance for 36 months or something. Now, after 36 months, the same act is going to come. The same problems will remain. Therefore, the government should allay the apprehensions and fear of the farmers and should ensure that they become an equal stakeholder proportionate to their contribution in terms of getting proper share of the income to be generated. Now, this is the answer. You may feel very strong about farmers, some of you. Some of you may feel very strong about the government. You may say that we have seen the corruption prevailing in the mandis, and why the farmers, and these farmers, they themselves are Jodhas, big landlords. The real farmer, the small and marginal farmer is not taken into consideration. So this is the best way to tackle with them. Some people may feel like that. And some people may feel that ultimately farmer is the beginning and end. If nothing happens to farmer in the new economic order, why should he cooperate? He may feel like that. But in all this, we should not forget the basic fact that Indian agriculture is an underutilized sector. There are many problems added to. We have not integrated Indian agriculture globally as much as we should have integrated. If it goes to big industry, they will know which crop is in shortage in which parts of the world, and because of which, how if farmers are asked to cultivate that particular crop, our profits can grow manifold. They know about it. Our farmers do not have the wherewithal to know about a global situation. So these are the plus points of bringing big industry. On the other hand, when such a big industry is brought in, how do we ensure that they don't swallow the small farmer? So these are the two issues, sir. And I believe that middle path need be adopted by both the parties concerned. So I have given you one example as to how you cannot take sides only with the Madhavi, is the volume okay now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good. Yeah, one question that was asked was how should we find solution to farmers' protest? And another question that is asked is how to answer a question on recent controversy related to West Bengal Chief Secretary.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now this is a question. I hope it will still engage the minds of the people who interview, and we should be able to. I'm in a Zoom meeting. I'll call you later. Okay, till 8:30, I'll be in this meeting. I'll call you later. Okay, right. So now let us remember one thing. You should have studied All India Conduct Rules. Okay. Now All India Service Conduct Rules, so I think it is section 6(4)(a), I think section 6(1)(a) or section 4(1)(a), whatever it is. Now that says when officers are sent on deputation. First of all, what is All India Service? Let me tell you. Those officers who are recruited to be posted to various states. There are only 3 services today: Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service, and Indian Forest Service. The recruitment is done by Union Public Service Commission, and then the officers are sent to various cadres. Once the officers are sent to all these cadres, they become the property of the state governments, not the center. Let's be very clear on this. Now, when in IAS, for instance, what is known as deputation strength is maximum, because originally it was intended that only IAS officers will be occupying the secretarial positions in the center. Later on, other services also come now. So suppose in a state, say in Tamil Nadu or in Karnataka, let's say the example of Karnataka, suppose 200 persons are required in various levels in Karnataka government service. The IAS recruitment will be 200 plus 40%, 280. Why this 40%? Because from this 40%, they will take people to be deputed to center, to be deputed to what is known as a non-cadre post within the state, and also leave reserve, because people will go on leave, etc. So for all this proportional representation, 40% is for the deputation strength, and then I think 5%, etc., for this leave reserve and then other things. So enough number of candidates have been included in the cadre strength when the cadre is allocated its offices. In other words, some officers have to go on deputation to center, otherwise there will be stagnation in the state. So this point is now resolved. So how to send people on deputation? There are two ways. Government of India may ask for a particular officer, but normally what happens every year, the state government will be sending a list of officers after getting their willingness that these set of officers are willing to go and serve in Government of India. Thereafter, Government of India, on the basis of the ACRs, etc., will decide which of those officers can be taken into Government of India. Therefore, there is concurrence on two sides. If Government of India asks for a particular officer, then state government, they should consult the state government, and state government should give the concurrence. That was the old rule. Then the rule was modified. After consulting, even if the state government does not give concurrence, Government of India can still take an officer on deputation. A proviso was made to the rules. Therefore, the rule is, in this case, Government of India wanted the services of Mr. Alupan Mukhopadhyay, the then Chief Secretary of West Bengal. Then the normal procedure to be followed in this case is Government of India should have consulted the state. They should have asked the state, please give the services of Mr. Alupan Mukhopadhyay. State government could have said yes or no. In this case, most probably they would have said no. Why? Because he was to retire on May 31, and the state government wanted to extend his service by 3 more months only because the reason stated by them was to have a continuity in the administrative structure to tackle the COVID-19 crisis. At that time, it was only COVID-19. SARS was not there. The cyclone was not there. So Government of India accepted this request and gave 3 months extension. This would mean that the extension was given for him to continue as Chief Secretary of the state government. Okay, now Government of India decided that they will take him to be posted in Administrative Training Institute. Now, if the decision is taken, Government of India should have consulted the state. They missed this fine point. They did not consult the state. They just issued an order. State government caught hold of this legal infirmity. And then they wrote to Government of India, we asked for this extension only for tackling the COVID-19 crisis, so that he has to continue as Chief Secretary. And you now are posting him, not asking, posting him in Government of India in Administrative Training Institute. The due consultative process was not adopted in this case. Therefore, we are unable to send him on deputation to Government of India. Now, legally, the state was right in pointing out this legal infirmity. Mr. Alupan Bandyopadhyay found that this is becoming too ugly. Two state government and central government fighting against each other, and he is caught in the crossfire. Therefore, he chose the next option. He might have asked Government of West Bengal to allow him to retire, to superannuate on the date without availing the employment, 3 months employment that was given, extension that was given. Now, we do not know what happened. State government, without allowing those 3 months extension, they retired him. Again, state government was well within its rule. State governments have been empowered by the central government to allow an officer to go on superannuation on attaining the age of superannuation. So, legally, whatever state government had done in this was right. I think Government of India perhaps acted in a hurry, and in that great hurry, they had not looked at the legal provisions correctly. If they had asked the state government to consider to relieve Alupan Bandyopadhyay, and if the state government had refused, they could have still exercised their option to compulsorily take Alupan Bandyopadhyay to the central deputation. The Government of India, in my opinion, failed in this final aspect. Now, thereafter, when Government of India issued a notice to him, let us remember, they have not issued any notice under conduct of service rules, breach of conduct of service rules. What they have said is, you were asked to come and attend a meeting on COVID-19 and SARS, especially I think SARS, because it was under disaster management that the notice was issued. Now, by leaving the meeting halfway, you have created problems in disaster management. something like that. They have issued a notice. Now again, 2 points here. Government of West Bengal, the Chief Minister of West Bengal government has written a letter to Prime Minister of India, where she has said, I came rather late because helicopter did not take off in Diga, where she went in connection with this supervision of Saswar. And I came late, and she has given political reasons. I didn't want anybody else to be present. In other states, you have not asked anybody else to be present. But here you wanted, apart from governor and central ministers, even the local MLA was kept there. Now, this prevents me from discussing sensitive issues with you. She has indirectly stated it. And despite that, I came, and then I told you, I separately told you that I have to go for this to continue to look after the source work, and taking your permission, I have left. This is what she has said. Now, Government of India still has not given any denial to this. Prime Minister has not written, no, Madam Chief Minister, you did not take my permission. He has not said it. In the absence of any such a contention, we should presume that what she says in her letter is not incorrect. It is correct. That's what we should presume. Okay. Okay, she left. But then their point is, why did the chief secretary go? Because he has hurt the interests of the disaster management by leaving. Now, let us remember, the chief secretary is working under the state. He can go only by the directive of the state. And the state has directed. The CM has asked him to go along with her. And he cannot say, no, I will sit. This entire situation could have been avoided if Mamata Banerjee had been shrewd and told the PM, so I have to go, sorry, but I'm keeping my chief secretary here so that, he can continue to know the proceedings and take necessary action. If she had said it, most probably Mr. Modi would have said, no, if you are not there, I don't want your CS also. He can also go. So the burden would have been that of the Prime Minister. But obviously, Mamata Banerjee, I think, was also, she's known to be short-tempered, and she is known to be very crux with people. So I think that the situation was created, and there, this man has been caught in between the crossfire. In my personal opinion, the case against Mr. Alappan Bandhavate is not a very strong one. When it goes to the court, it will be issued, all issues will be looked into. If you look at the American Constitution, in the states' Senate houses, the federal officer cannot enter that without getting permission from the Speaker of the House. And the same is true about the state's autonomy. It's very, very well protected. Now, here also, ours is a union of states, according to the Constitution. India, namely Bharat, is a union of states. And both the state and center have the power to enact laws. So, the state also has sovereign power up to a certain point. And therefore, you have given officers to the state and have told the officers that they should work under the state. And then you cannot say, why were you not present, in my opinion. So if you want to answer, you should not say, sorry, PM Modi is wrong. Obviously, you cannot say. So you should say that there appears to be many gray points in this. It appears, Mamata Banerjee, from the letter of CM West Bengal, that is, the center has not engaged in consultative process while posting this officer on deputation to Government of India. We have not heard anything from center in this regard. We only have state's letter. And thereafter, Government of India has not found fault with Mr. Alappan Bandhavate as per conduct rules of All India Service rules, Act and rules. They have not. But they have said that disaster management, by him leaving the meeting halfway, he has hurt the interest of how effective implementation of disaster management. And therefore, they have issued a show cause notice to him. The issues that are to be resolved in case it goes to the court, because it most probably will go to the court for adjudication. The issues to be resolved would be when an officer works under the state, is he to follow the directive of the Prime Minister or anybody else representing the center when the state is represented by the CM? Opines differently or gives order differently. This is a gray area. And I think we should await the verdict of the court to find out what exactly will be the legal position, legal resolutions are. This is where you should end. You should not support the state or center. Though personally, I think the center acted rather immaturely in the whole episode. But you should never say it. Okay? Okay. IT rules asking for traceability regarding WhatsApp. Now, you should say that the security concerns of any state cannot be compromised. Number one. And therefore, if terrorists or persons inimical to the sovereignty of India are making use of WhatsApp to further their goal of destabilization of this great democracy, then WhatsApp or any social media should be told that when government has doubts about them, then such a doubt should be cleared and they should make available the correspondence about that particular person. At the same time, individual liberty and individual personal liberty and individual liberty is not something that can be compromised. Privacy, right to privacy cannot be compromised. Therefore, if Government of India makes a demand for uh, uh, information regarding the conversations, etc., postings of, etc., of a particular person to be made available to them, they should also invariably give reasons for it, adequate uh, evidence for it. Now, this will be the right thing because there cannot be a situation that Government of India can look into anybody's postings at any point of time. It can affect the privacy of a person. And privacy of a person is a very sacrosanct thing. It cannot be violated. I will give you to see, suppose there is a person whose brothers and sisters are not in good terms with the parents. And therefore, he is helping out the parents secretly. Now, without giving any reason, if his postings are made public, theoretically, he will make enemies of all his siblings. He will be doing it very privately without alienating his siblings, but it can happen. I'm just giving you one example. So, the sovereignty of a nation is not bargainable. If any person is engaged in disturbing the sovereignty of this great Indian democracy, and if government gives adequate proof, evidence of such a person, then the social media should be obliged to make available all those postings. Not only sovereignty, or even criminal activity of a person, smuggling, any person. And suppose there is a murder accused, and there is reason to believe that he is seeking the help of his people through the social media to hide himself. So any crime, I said sovereignty because that's the most important thing for all of us. And therefore, enough safeguards should be built in the act to ensure that a person's privacy is not disturbed without any rhyme or reason. This should be the answer. You all are welcome. After some time, after I finish this theoretical talk, there's going to be a question answer session. All of you are welcome to raise questions later on this also, whatever I have already told you. Okay, the other thing, Rajiv Gandhi assassination case, should the convicts be released? This is also another very difficult question to answer. Now, what should be your answer is the sentencing of a person and sending a person to jail. The basic intention is to reform him, not to punish him, to reform him. That's a basic thing. In Mahatma Gandhi's murder, the person who was proved to have been directly engaged in the conspiracy was relieved after a particular number of years. He was relieved from prison. He was released. In Rajiv Gandhi's case, a lot of controversy has, don't say a lot, some controversy has erupted after the sentencing has been done. The investigating officer, one Mr. Tyagarajan, has said that one member Mr. Perarivalan, one member, he supplied the electric battery for that bomb to explode. So he admitted that he purchased that battery to be handed over to Sivarasan, the man who actually plotted this murder, according to the charge sheet. But he also said, Mr. Sivarasan wanted a battery to be purchased, but I did not know the purpose for which he wanted it to be purchased. But I did not record this second sentence. This is what Mr. Tyagarajan, the investigating officer, has said much after his retirement. Therefore, a lot of some doubt has been raised as to whether the investigation and the charge sheeting were all totally fair or not. So this is one aspect. And the other aspect is some persons have spent more than 30 years. If our intention is to ensure that people are reformed, then 30 years is too long a period. There will always be a question. After all, they murdered a former prime minister of this country. It's a very emotional thing. As an individual, I feel agitated. I feel extremely disturbed that people can enter into my soil, my Indian soil, and commit this horrendous crime against a very young person who had lot many years to go in terms of political positions and in terms of serving the nation. And therefore, I feel very sad. And I really want these perpetrators of the crime to be punished. This will be the feeling of every right-thinking Indian. But at the same time, I also believe that if the family of Rajiv Gandhi has said that they have given up their anger against the perpetrators, and if we have to cling to, whether we have to cling to the idea that the jail sentence is for reforming the mind of the convict, then what will we do? These are all the questions that need to be resolved before a definitive answer of yes or no is given about the demand for release of these convicts. That should be your answer. Okay.
Sir, there is a question.
Yeah.
Is democracy, the quality of democracy is declining?
Yeah. See, it's not only in India. Democracy, two Harvard professors have written a beautiful book, How Democracies Die. That is the title of the book. You go to Google and search How Democracies Die, the author's name will be there. It's a very small book. All of you will be able to read it in no time, in around 2 or 2.5 hours time. Now there they say that a democracy is in peril in the US itself. In the US itself, democracy is in peril. They have given the example of North Pennsylvania. What happened when there was a Senate dominated by one party and the governor from another party, disregarding the majority voice, what were all the attempts made by the governor to thwart the democratic process? They have given in full length. And they were afraid of Trump at that time, that if Trump continues, then democracy will be in peril in the US. That was their fear. Now, today, around 30 years back, who thwarted democracy? Democracy is thwarted by generals of the army who successfully conducted a coup and then they came to power. But today, generally, it is said that people who got elected through the democratic process themselves are plotting to disturb the democratic structure, and that is how democracies become weak. Now, two things are essential for democracy to continue to be vibrant. People who get elected to the highest offices. What are the highest offices? The MPs and MLAs, the parliament and the state assemblies. Now, they have to be staunch believers in democracy, and they have to be having the maturity to look at a dissent as not a enmity. Okay. There is no assurance that this will happen. A wrong person can come. Then, when such a wrong person comes, what will still safeguard and strengthen the democracy? What are the pillars of democracy? The institutionalized structures of democracy. What are those institutional structures? They are within government and without government. Without a government, election commission, the courts, they are outside the government. They are within the state, but they are outside the government. And within the government, the investigative and the enforcement agencies like Enforcement Directorate, CBI, the police in the state. Now, these are within. Now, these institutions should be impartial. This is very important. If these institutions lose their character of impartiality and they become an adjunct of the powers that be, there is a difference between a government and a political party in power. So, if they become adjuncts of the powers that be, then democracy will be really in peril. Indian experimenting has been, at times, we have found that the courts have not lived up to the expectations of the people, but at times we have also found that the courts have risen to the occasion. Therefore, it is a mixed bag in India. We all should pray. Amit Kumar has a question, I think, right? Amit, do you have a question? I found your finger coming. Okay, if you don't have a question. Therefore, all our endeavor should be to strengthen these pillars, these institutions, instruments of democracy. That is much more important. The second important thing is to ensure that mature people get elected, for which the most important aspect is having a mature electorate. It will take time. In India, the mature electorate is not universally present. People can still vote on the basis of freebies. So electoral parties will compete with each other to offer a better freebie in comparison to the other political party. Slowly but surely, Indian democracy is firming up itself. We should all hope and contribute our might to strengthen the democratic process.
So there is another question asked. How firm can we be in our opinion, sir? If any opinion is asked, how firm can we be?
It
How
all
critical can we be?
It all depends on what is the particular question. Like I told you, if they ask about the Chief Secretary's affair in West Bengal, you can be firm in saying that Government of India erred in posting him without undergoing the consultative process with the state, because it's a matter of record. You can say that. And you can also say the entire situation could have been avoided if West Bengal Chief Minister, when she left the meeting, if she had said, my CS will be present here, so that there will be continuity in action to be taken by the state. That's also true. She did not have that presence of mind at that time. So present to both the facts. Both are very firm facts. Present to them. When there is a fact, you should be very firm when you are polite. You should not be impolite in emphasizing on the firmness. That's all. Have I answered your question, Madhavi?
Yes, sir. Sir, regarding the Kumbh Mela, the Tablighi incident, and also the Sabarimala issue, can you throw light on that, sir? The religious matters and all.
Yeah, Kumbh Mela should have been avoided. And when you say this, you should also say another thing, which is a fact. One of the medical experts, from Vellore, is a great authority on epidemiology. And he has said the problem in India is the cherished values of religion are in contradiction with the proved facts given by science. Now, this is a problem. Now, do you think that it was only the doing of the state government that we had the Kumbh Mela? If the state government said, go ahead with Kumbh Mela, if the people believed, no, this is very dangerous nowadays, there would have been no crowd in the Kumbh Mela. See, people really believe that taking a dip in the Ganges, it will cure me of everything. So, this is, you call it a culture or you call it a belief handed over from generation to generation. Now, the government should have, in my opinion, been very firm in telling that we should not allow this Kumbh Mela to happen now. After all, let us remember, in Tamil Nadu, there is one Chitra festival taking place in Madurai every year. Great, around 30, 40 villages say, people will be coming. Thousands of people will congregate in very small, narrow area. But the local collector issued an order. There shall be no Chitra festival. Congregation of people will not be there. You can conduct your pujas. A few priests can come and conduct the pujas. And that was complied with. Now, during election, the election commission, two things did not happen. the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in Government of India should have sent an advisory to Election Commission telling them, please ban public meetings. They should have given an advisory. Even without that advisory, Election Commission could have acted on its own self. These two things did not happen. Now here you should be very firm because it's a fact. The second wave, India was not prepared for the second wave. It is a fact. Therefore, this question can also be asked, apart from Kumbh Mela, was India prepared? Was India government at fault in not attending to the impact of second wave? So you should say, yeah, to some extent, the government was not prepared to face a second wave. But what is consoling now is, I think government has learned from out of its mistake, and we are better prepared for the third wave. So you should give some concession to government also while coming out with the truth that we were not prepared. Don't stop only at we were not prepared. That means that looks like a big indictment on government. Government deserved that indictment, but you don't say it in your interview. You also add one sentence, to favor the government as to they have been sincere. Now they have learned their lesson. Therefore, we are better prepared for the third wave. You asked about Kumbh Mela, and Madhavi, what's the other one you asked?
The Tablighi they say that COVID spread because of that particular.
Yeah. You see, that was now, I think one court has also come out with the verdict that it was very wrong to spread such a rumor. That was a foolish thing to do. One sect of Muslims, because other sects of Muslims advised them, don't go ahead with it. At that time, these people did it. And therefore, it was certainly not a wise thing. As much as it was not a wise thing, it's also a fact that that was not solely responsible for the spread of COVID in the first phase. Certainly not. That's a fact. And I think you should state that fact.
Okay, sir. Sir, about the Lakshadweep incident, sir, the people wants the administrator to go back. What is the issue about that particular, whether there is a lot of issue like environment versus development? It is always an issue, sir.
No. The order is not just about environment versus development.
It is more than that, sir. But
no, the fight is between environment and lopsided development.
Yes, sir.
Proposed is lopsided development. You see, in the end, Lakshadweep has around 36 islands or something. 10 islands are inhabited. Please go through the rights up on Lakshadweep and get the statistical data correctly. I think 36 islands. 10 islands are inhabited, populated. Now, one island had been given to be developed as a resort. A non-habited island was given. And then there was some problem between the company who took the lease and then the government, and therefore, it has been given up. What now these people were trying to do, Vivek, I am in a Zoom meeting. I'll call you after 8:45. Okay? Right. So he did a number of things. Now you go by the results. Now it was a green area. COVID was not affecting during the first phase. Because even if people have reported negative, when they come into the island, they were advised to be on quarantine for a week. Now he lifted that quarantine thing. He said, no, you can come. Now it got affected. There have been a few deaths and there have been a quantum jump in the cases of COVID. It has happened. Okay. Now, this is one. What's the second one? He wanted to widen the roads, put metal roads. You don't require metal roads in that place. You don't require such a wide. The total length in any island will be of a road will be not more than 8 kilometers or something. So where do you want to? And when you want to widen the road, what do you do? Now, suppose the road is 22 feet now, and you want to make it 46 feet. You want to add 24 feet more, 12 feet this side, 12 feet that side. And 12 feet this side and 12 feet that side, there are already hutments and small houses. So you will be removing all those people. You will be unnecessarily rendering them homeless. Then in this place, in the beach, people have always kept small hutments. In the hutment, they have kept their boats and then the instruments required for fishing rod and other things. Now he said it goes against Coastal Regulation Act. Coastal Regulation Act says from the beach up to 500 meters, there cannot be any structure. And it was done after the tsunami of 2004. But what perhaps the advisor was not properly advised was these small hutments, temporary hutments of fishermen have been exempted under that very act. Therefore, that was also not necessary. Then, beef is a staple food for those people. Like Keralites, these people also take beef. Now, beef was banned from the midday meals, etc., that was being given to the children. Then, now he said they can make use of fish, but then the problem is during monsoon, fishing is not very easy, and therefore a staple food was taken away without providing real good alternative. And then liquor business was allowed. Now they said it was allowed for tourists, but those people, they did not have this liquor business there, in such a big sense. And therefore they thought that liquor business will bring law and order issues. So they are against it. And then he wants of the three acts, one of the acts that he proposed, was what is formally known here as Gundas Act. Now, Lakshadweep crime rate is one among the lowest in the country. It is lower than the national average. Why do you want a Gundas Act there? You don't need it at all. So he was telling that, anti-nationals will come and therefore we should be well prepared. But, the existing laws are more than sufficient to deal with the anti-nationals if anybody wants to come and harbor themselves there. It is more than sufficient. You never are successful in maintenance of law and order when you alienate the majority of your people. It is these people who will come and give you information. You cannot post a policeman in every doorstep. It is a common man who will come and give you information. If the common man is feeling disturbed, he won't give that information. He will feel alienated from the government. Therefore, generally, the environmentalists and whatever he is proposing for this big tourism, etc., you see that it is made out of those corals, islands. They are not very strong. And if you are wanting to have such a big pakka roads, you do not even know whether the island surface will stand that pressure. I don't know whether proper studies have been done. So in Lakshadweep thing, I don't find any positive point in whatever the administrator is telling. And I'm afraid that is what you will have to say. You will have to say that if the administrator has any positive point, then he has to come down very clearly and enlighten the people about it, make them a party to the decision. So there is a local panchayat there. And in the local panchayat, a young IAS officer is posted. He elected representatives. That is the only body of elected representatives. The administrator reportedly did not consult this local body before sending these proposals to Government of India. They have not yet become acts, but they have been sent as his draft proposal. And therefore, there is a hue and cry that this should not be allowed. The ecology of these fragile lands, Andaman, Nicobar, then Lakshadweep and Minikai, there was a committee with the Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi period, with Prime Minister as chairperson. This committee, they studied and then they decided the method as to how to improve the economic prosperity of this area. How to improve the economic prosperity of this area need be improved by taking best advantage of the sea resources and creating minimum discomfort to the fragile ecology of the land mass there. So this was the decision. And what the administrator now proposes makes it appear that he is not giving due importance to these facts.
So regarding the National Capital Region, there is an issue between a Lieutenant Governor and the Chief Minister, sir. So, and also there was a recent bill passed as GNCT bill. What is your take on that, sir? And how a question can be asked and how the answer can be given?
You see, the National Capital Territory, what is known as NC, the National Capital Territory includes not only proper New Delhi, it includes Old Delhi, it includes some of the villages beyond that. Any nation state like India cannot afford to leave the security of the union government in the hands of elected government, the state government. That much is very clear. So what is the security area concerned? security area concerned, in my opinion, is the immediate New Delhi area. Your parliament, president's estate, then vice president's place, residences of all government, senior government officers and ministers, and the military establishments. These are the areas. But right in the beginning, more of areas were there in Delhi government, New Delhi government, and it was a union territory. There have always been demands by elected chief ministers that this union territory should be given full statehood. Now, giving full statehood and giving the entire authority of all the area is creating problem, as I have told you. The security of the union government cannot be left to the concern of a state. So they have to take care. Like Washington area, I think you should go to Google and study. If I remember correctly, Washington DC, where there also it's a District of Columbia, but there are demands that it should be made a separate state. They still have not. It still has not happened. There, I think it is the federal force, which is in control there. Therefore, it is necessary that federal government in India also should be in control of the vital establishments of union governance. But to reconcile these two opposite factors, union government wanting the governor to be the final arbitrator and the elected representative saying we should be made a full state, to sort of bring adjudication between the two, certain powers like health and education, where the elected government was given full powers in these two matters. The proposal now, the act that has been passed, it ensures that even in matters of education and health, the governor's say is the final say. Now, write this down if you want to. The solutions for the problems of democracy lie in more of democracy, not in less of democracy. Therefore, there is no point in taking back whatever authority is left to a government, a territory where there is an elected representatives government. There is it is best avoided, because New Delhi and surrounding areas are two sensitive areas for India and its security. There, it is not wise to have an elected government which is a disgruntled government. It may not be wise. Therefore, there should be your answer. You should not take the side of the state government, which says, you make me a full-fledged state. You should not take the side of the central government, which wants all the authority to be arrogated to the governor. Then if that is the case, then why do you need an elected government at all? Therefore, you should say that there has to be a midway between these two approaches. What's the other thing?
Yes, sir. Sir, changing the name of the city and carving out many districts, is it right move, sir?
Which city's change of name you are having?
Like Aurangabad and even the street's name in Delhi and all.
Allahabad.
Yeah, you don't say when they quote Aurangabad, you don't answer as Aurangabad. You slightly change your answer. There is a road in Chennai. It was called North Beach Road. It was called the North Beach Road because it lay on the north side of the beach. Now, during DMK period, they named it Kamarajar Road. It lost its geographical significance. No, they could have named it Kamaraj North Beach Road. They could have named it. They just said North Beach Road, and they just said Kamarajar Road. So you see that such renaming without consideration to the cultural past and the geographical indicators are not good. You stop at that. Don't go to the Aurangabad thing. Then immediately it becomes a religious thing. Quote some other example. Like Bombay becoming Mumbai is quite okay because Mumbai was the original name. Madras becoming Chennai, it's quite okay. Nobody is going to object to it.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, actually, the question was in the reference to basically UP, where Allahabad is changed to Prayagraj and Mughal Sarai railway station has been changed to Deen Dayal Upadhyay and Firozabad changed to Ayodhya. I think the person asked the question is in that reference.
Yes, I have told you the answer. I have told you the cultural past and the geographical. See, Prayag, compared to Allahabad, Prayag has, I think it is a meeting of three rivers, right? In that point, Allahabad thing. Is it
Yes,
so?
sir. Sangam. Yes, sir.
Sangam is called. So there is some significance in that. Now, I would have preferred personally, Allahabad Prayag. Prayag also would have indicated what exactly it is, and Allahabad being a name that has been there for a long time. Now, you cannot have a name that has been there for a long time just for the sake of it. Suppose it is it's a name that reminds you of a cultural invasion. Like the British, they named a lot of places according to their tongue was not twisting. Therefore, Tirunelveli was named Tinaveli. So this kind of name change, there may not, and Tirunelveli, it has got a cultural significance, every word, Tirunelveli, it shows why that place was called Tirunelveli. Therefore, changing it will not be a problem. But otherwise, one should be, instead of saying, changing Allahabad to be Prayag, etc. is wrong, because some people may have opposite views. You should say that in such changes, it is always better to consult all the stakeholders. Leave it at that. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, sorry to disturb you, but I asked this question because there is a issue that changing name from Aurangabad to Sambhajinagar. Actually, there is no linkage of the Sambhajinagar to the Aurangabad city, and it is a religious issue also, sir. So, because
Yes.
Hindu Muslim, so are you suggesting I should not introduce the religious angle because
You
it is
can, because you brought out an important point. Sambhaji Nagar has no relevance at all because Sambhaji has not visited that area or he has not captured that area. That's what you are trying to say.
yes,
So you say that historically this name is not justified. There seems to be no rhyme or reason as to why Sambhaji's name should be given to this place. And therefore, we would think the renaming is on some extraneous considerations which are best avoided. You say that.
yes. Thank you, sir.
Sir, NEET issue and the CUCET, that is a common university test that is proposed now, and even the NEET, which was proposed earlier, the controversy over that, sir.
Yeah, you see, NEET was ostensibly, it was said that it was brought to bring uniformity in educational standards, selection process. Now, let us look at one problem. If somebody scores 70% and somebody else scores 45%, now if you want to bring it to uniformity, do you bring it to 70% or 45%? Has this question been resolved in NEET? Number one. Number two, any introduction of any scheme should not forget the basic issue that education should be available to any intelligent person irrespective of his background. Now, by the very NEET, I am told, is basically based on CBSE syllabus. There are a number of state governments who are not following CBSE. Calcutta doesn't follow. There are CBSE schools, but Calcutta State Board is much more tougher than CBSE. Much more tougher. And Tamil Nadu does not follow. There are a number of states who do not follow. Therefore, you are making unequals fight an equal fight. This is what people who oppose need to feel. I think, therefore, the best solution would be to continuously asking the state governments to come up to the prescribed standard, while at the same time giving them the option to take the NEET route or not, and even where NEET route is followed, to ensure that the present system of spending lakhs and lakhs of rupees through coaching centers alone will give you a place in the NEET, because studies reveal that after NEET was introduced, it's only affluent classes who are able to find placement in a majority way in comparison to what it was in the past. If that be so, that certainly needs to be corrected. So your answer is twofold. The existing, now we have done NEET for 3 years. A study should be undertaken to find out whether there are drawbacks from within the system and how to rectify them. And then if the state governments, some state governments are having second thoughts about NEET, give them some time, tell them that they have to bring their education standards at par with the standard that you have in mind, but give them some time.
Sir, about the local job reservation, various states started giving local job reservation, like based on caste or whatever local locality. So, what is the take on that, sir? Will it affect federal unity?
You see, two things. If the local job reservation is not there, and over a period of time, if it is seen that that locality is dominated by people from outside that locality, then resentment will grow. This is one aspect. This would make it appear that local job reservation is justified. But on the other hand, India is a country. I should have freedom of movement, freedom of migration from one place to another. And therefore, I should be having the opportunity everywhere. Now, so far as the state government jobs are concerned, there may be some justification in giving priority to people of that state. But otherwise, there should not be any bar on anybody entering into any part of India and getting a job from there or getting a business there.
Sir, privatization of PSUs, and even there was a meme saying that civil service will be privatized. What's your take on that, sir?
You see, there are some PSUs which are not required. They were required in the beginning. Now, there were good cosmetics were not available in India. So casually, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was making a mention about it to Tata, Naval Tata. And therefore, Naval Tata started a unit to produce it. And steel is very much required for industrialization. And in private sector, you did not have too many people who can invest that much at that particular point of time. Therefore, Government of India needed to have SAIL, a very big unit. It had to be there. There are a number of units, like fertilizers, etc. The core sector requirements ought to be met up, and there the benefits should be proportionate. The cost structure and the benefits should be proportionate. Therefore, essentially, the role of the public sector is as a market interventionist force. Mark this word, market interventionist force. Now, if you do not have an Air India, at a time of crisis, a ticket to this should cost only 3,000 rupees. If it is going to cost 12,000 rupees by Indigo or SpiceJet. Now, at that time, people will be helpless. But if there is an Air India, then Air India says, I am taking temporarily a few more flights on lease, and then I continue to charge 3,500 rupees. So who will go for 12,000? Therefore, they will be forced to bring down their price. Therefore, public sector should act effectively as a market interventionist force in core sectors. I repeat the word core sectors. What is core sector has to be properly analyzed and defined by the government. In such core sectors, it is not wise to do away with the public sector. I am told that even railways, there is an attempt to privatize. In fact, this year I am told Indian Railway Service, Indian Railway Account Service, etc. They are not finding a place in your choices. That's what I am told. Because they want to have one railway management service or something. They still have not decided on it. Now, you need to have government's presence in core sectors, and instead of selling it, what China did. I went to China in 1992, 97, 98, and our ambassador, he was telling me, he said, China did a survey of what are all the lands under various government departments in Beijing, in Shanghai and other places. In Beijing, they found that army had the maximum quantum of lands. So they invited other people, foreigners, to come and set up a private sector, 5-star hotels. They said land is our equity. 51% is my equity. 49% is your equity. You run the hotel, and we share the profit. The government even knew that they can manipulate the profit, the income. But the government was also assured that the property will always remain the government's property. Any day, in one of the meetings, they can dismiss all the board of directors and they can take over the management. That possibility was there. Therefore, government should assure that it does not lose its hold on certain vital sectors of economy. They need not be themselves present as China did, 51% is mine, you run the industry, you run the company. Now, this could have been done. Even in all our hotels, the ITC hotels, ITTC hotels, Indian Tourism Development Corporation hotels, in those hotels, in my opinion, it was not necessary to sell away all these hotels. We could have asked them to participate in the equity, and we could have kept our equity at 51%. And we could have told them 49%, but you run the hotel. Because it's not government's business to run a hotel. But at any point of time, if you find that you are mischievous and then you will raise your rate. After all, I am the boss, I am the major shareholder, and then I will prevail upon you. No. Yes, profit is certainly important, but exploitation is not allowed. So this what should be an approach in a nation like India, where you see, if you want to go to northeastern states, Air India and Indian Airlines had highly subsidized the flight charges to northeast. I do not know how many of the private sector are doing it, and there is an enforcement authority, Indian Air Force, Air Force Authority or Air Authority, Economic Regulatory Authority. Mr. Machendranathan was the chief. So I do not know about their functions, honestly. But it's sufficient for you to say government should not lose its hold on critical areas where market interventionist forces are necessary. But keeping the hold, government also should not engage in businesses that is none of government's business. They should allow the private sector to function. Always keeping the possibility of government's intervention when the private sector can become too greedy. Yes?
About the Uniform Civil Code, sir, is it necessary to come, or we can go with the phased reformation of the personal laws?
Listen, India, you can have either unity or uniformity. You cannot have both. If you want the unity of the country, then you should not insist on uniformity. At the same time, in every religious practice, there are areas, where corrections are necessary. Like your Ayyappan temple, the women, you will be surprised to know that it's a ruling party at the center, one of the persons of the ruling party at center who first filed a case that women should be allowed to go. And the court has come out with a very clear directive that if any religious practice runs contrary to the fundamental rights provided by the Constitution of India, then such religious practices need to undergo amendments, corrective process. This is what they have said. And that is true about every religion. So it is best to allow the religions, to reform themselves, if necessary by court interventions at times, rather than trying to bring a uniform code.
Yes, sir. About the sedition law, sir, and the defamation, such misuse of law by the government.
Yeah, you see, every government, let's not blame only the present government. As Lord Acton said, you can note it down. There was a person called Lord Acton. He said, power corrupts. Absolute power absolutely corrupts. That's what he said. Therefore, anybody in position of authority, there is a tendency to misuse that authority. It's a human nature. There is a tendency. As I have already told you, the courts should be very firm in pointing out the distinction between dissent to government and sedition to the nation. That should be very clearly pointed out by the court. Recently, Delhi High Court has given one such order about 3 students who have been under UAPA. They had been booked and they were languishing in the jail for more than a year, and it has come as a big relief. Now, we should know that these are fundamental rights. Fundamental right to liberty cannot be suppressed by invoking an act, provisions of an act without adequate proof. When such things happen, then the courts should intervene. Let us not forget that India still has not, India became a republic in 1950, and Indian democracy and the Republican spirit of India was imposed from above. It did not grow from below. So till that grows from below, such stringent acts at times may be necessary, but such acts should be made use of very judiciously, and where they are not made use of judiciously, courts should be the cherisher and protector of democracy and fundamental rights of people.
Sir, about the Central Vista project, sir, they were asking not to do it in a pandemic situation.
Yeah, if government had decided not to go ahead with it during a pandemic, it would have added glory to government. But government is adamant in going ahead. And apart from that, there are some environmental issues. But the courts have already decided in favor, and court's verdict is final in India. Therefore, the environmental issue, etc., we are not able to raise it now because courts have already said that this scheme does not violate. But the sensitivity of the issue, namely at this point of time, do you really want to go ahead with it? Yes, it could have been postponed. That should be your approach.
Sir, about the CAA protest, sir, against the CAA protest and the UPA slapped against the student activist. What's your take on that, sir?
Yeah, you should say that about CAA, you should say that government should make it a point to consult the stakeholders. Consulting is not concurrence, but the process of consultation should be sincere and deep, and then government should come to a decision. And regarding UAPA, see, UAPA against students, you see, UAPA is not meant only to be against students. Some students have been apprehended, and therefore you are saying that UAPA or any such stringent act, a Dowries Act or SC/ST Atrocities Act, now these acts need be made use of in a very judicious manner.
Sir, about the NRC issue, that is wherein they are deporting the people who are there without citizenship.
Which one? I didn't follow your question.
The refugees in case of the Northeast, sir, they are deported because they are not having citizenship.
Refugees in case of which state?
In Northeastern states, sir.
They have not been given citizenship.
No, sir, they are not having citizenship. So they are asked to deport. They are being deported, no, sir. But they are having long routes in the
Northeastern, which state? You are talking about that Assam thing?
No, sir, the Bangladeshi people who have migrated as a refugee to the Northeast.
Rohingyas.
Yeah.
Rohingya.
Are you talking about the Rohingyas? They came from Burma.
No, not Rohingya, sir. Bangladesh after 1971.
Yeah, you see, you have heard about what is called osmosis. Osmosis is when there are two solutions of different concentration divided by a thin membrane. After some time, you will find that through the porous membrane, the solutions will interchange places. And after some time, both the solutions will have the same concentration. Now, this is osmosis. Now, whether it is South American country, Mexico versus United States, or Bangladesh versus India, you will always find that less affluent or less people living in less comfortable positions, they will always try to migrate into areas of more comfort, be it economic conditions or social conditions. They will try to migrate. The Bangladeshi Muslims coming into India is a albatross around our neck, handed over to us by the past politicians. In Assam, once upon a time, it was encouraged because they thought, the people thought that they get cheap labor. The plantation people, the agricultural people, they thought they get cheap labor. The politician thought that they get a firm vote bank. Now, because of these combined factors, the evil has taken place. Yes, it's certainly not fair. People who are not citizens of this country. And India is not such an economically strong country that it can take another 1 crore or 2 crores. We are 136 crores. If 1.36 crore people come, that is adding 1% burden to India's population. Therefore, there need be check about the porous border, and we have to enact a very strict laws about people, not our citizens, entering into the country. The point is, what happens to people who entered post 1971? India has given a cutoff date, 1971. The question you should raise is, we should first find out what is the justification for having 1971 as a cutoff date. Why not 1947? Why not 1997? Why 1971? This question has not, it seems, been amicably resolved by the government. Again, the stakeholders have their own agitations, and opposition parties, for their own end, they are trying to make use of the agitative mode of, that is the nature of opposition. Therefore, in all this, the consultative process should be there and it should be seen to be there. Then I think when fair decisions are taken, therefore implementation, there will be no difficulty.
Sir, about the
Yes.
yes, sir. Demonetization, sir. Is it a success or a failure, sir? That is the one question.
Demonetization has raised some questions which have not been answered to the satisfaction of the economists. Now, two important reasons given for demonetization were the inflation tendencies have to be cut off. Therefore, higher denominations have to be brought down. That is the intention. By demonetizing 1,000 rupee note, why did you print 2,000 rupee note? No, this has not been answered satisfactorily. Then the other thing, terrorists and others, they have bulk of our notes, fake currencies of 500 and 1,000. One report, you'll have to check up in Google. One report suggested that immediately after the 2,000 rupee note came into existence, in the pocket of one of the terrorists who was shot dead in Kashmir, there were fake 2,000 rupee notes. Now, if that be true, then even that has not been realized. And then the third thing, the impact of such a demonetization on Indian economy, parts of which are completely cash driven, that appears not to have been studied well in advance. Now, textile industry in Gujarat, for instance, completely 90%, it's running into several thousand crores of rupees. But then it is a cash driven economy. Your agriculture is a cash driven economy. Your tourism is a cash driven economy. Mostly, it's a cash driven economy. And your real estate business, building, construction activities, most of it, it was a cash-driven economy. So today, the daily wage, when it is say 300 rupees to 600 rupees for a construction labor, it was easy to give 500 rupee note. And you demonetized 500 rupee and 1,000 rupee notes. And then there were not enough notes in circulation for your 100 rupee or new 500 and 2,000. They came much later. So people did suffer. Now this impact had not been studied well. Now in a country, at times, harsh measures like a demonetization or partial demolition of currencies will be required. In United Kingdom, there was a situation where the £5 note, fake currency was in great circulation. It's a rumor. What they did, they said all the £5 notes printed prior to this date, they are invalid. They declared it a few years back. So such measures are necessary in every country. But then when you do it, they also said you people can go and deposit all your £5 notes in such and such banks. Up to such and such a dates, it will be accepted. But in demonetization, what happened? People were first told that within this date, you should exchange your notes. You should go to the bank and then deposit. Which is a good step because when suppose I go and give 1.5 lakhs of rupees, yes, 1.5 lakhs I can have. I have the economic capability and I would have taken it as a safeguarding measure. But if I have 10 lakhs of rupees or 50 lakhs of rupees, then I am subject to question, which means that my money is not illegally earned money. So to that extent, it helped. There is no doubt about it. But when doing so, they also said that if you are abroad, when you come back, you can go to this one RBI office or some of the designated banks, and then you can exchange. Having said it, government went back on its word. They said, now we will check up whether in that particular period, whether you were away, only then we will allow. Something like this. I don't exactly remember. It was contrary to the earlier promise given by the government. So government's promises were not uniformly kept, and therefore people were put into a lot of difficulties. While there can be an argument as to whether demonetization is necessary or not, the way demonetization was done brought paralysis in certain sectors of the economy, which also increased the discomforts of certain vital sectors like small and marginal SMEs. These sectors, they suffered. That should have been avoided. It should have been planned better. Now, with the same thing, they will be asking you about GST. In my opinion, demonetization GST should not have been brought within such a short notice. There should have been enough gap, number one. And GST, when it was done, in many countries, there is only one slab, 0 and then 5%, or 0 and 7.5%. Here we have 4 slabs, I think. And again, I think, you see, this GST is very important. Whatever other people say, goods and services, a common act is very important. Common tax system is very important. No doubt about it. Because otherwise, the people were not able to do business correctly. Now, when you go through all these checkposts, every state government will have its own tax structure. And therefore, apart from the confusion that it created, the kind of informal spending, corruption, that was also rampant. So there is no doubt that a uniform tax code GST for goods and services is welcome. But then again, it should have been planned well, and then it should have been implemented. Even the most immaculate planning will not give 100% success. We will learn out of experience, and then we will continually upgrade ourselves. But here it would appear that the closeness between demonetization and GST and lack of adequate studies on the impact of the implementation of both these have contributed much to the decline in our economy, which was best avoided.
Sir, about the Mullai Periyar issue, sir.
Yeah.
About yes, sir. The controversy that is it safety for Kerala or the water for Tamil Nadu?
You see, I think if that question is asked, you should just say that with the effective adjudication of center, it is important for both the states to resolve their differences. Like, from 152 feet height, the dam's height was reduced to 136 feet. Obviously, at that time, they said that for maintenance and repair. Then after maintenance and repair, Kerala government had a lot of objection to raise it again to 152. And they fought it out in the Supreme Court, and I think Tamil Nadu government won. The problem is the states should finally accept the verdict of the highest court of the law of the land. If that is not done, then the affected state will be put into great disadvantage, because that is what happened in both the Mullai Periyar as well as Kaveri discharge. The Karnataka government, very frankly, they said, sorry, we cannot give water. But again, government of Karnataka had a reason. Now they were saying, suppose you are asking me to give 80 TMC at this particular period. The total water flowing is only 62 TMC. Where from do I give 80 TMC to Tamil Nadu government? It's a very, very reasonable question. Therefore, proper study should have been done, and equity distribution should have been on equity basis. Government of Karnataka's mistake is whenever there is excess water, they just release all the water so that their dams will be protected. Then they say, no, our total water release is this much. So how can you say that we are not released water? But this water is required in periodic strains. There is a crop called Kuruvai. And for Kuruvai season, you have to release water between June and August. Likewise, for the long-term crop, you will have to release. So this has been designated by the court, by the concerned authority, appellate authority. But I think that decision itself needs greater look into to satisfy both the states, especially Karnataka, I think has some legitimate grievances about the way the sharing in has been arranged. And therefore, when there is a lean season, what will be the water to be distributed? This thing, I think, need be resolved.
about Article 370 abrogation and the Jammu and Kashmir redrawing.
Yeah, you see, Article 370 was giving special status to Jammu and Kashmir. In Jammu and Kashmir, we are suffering because of the historical mistakes, done by the then government. When our army was marching ahead, the government immediately suddenly said, "You halt." And the general was telling, "Give me only 3 more days. I will capture the entire Kashmir and then I will come back." No, the government said, "No, you come back." And therefore, ceasefire. So where the Pakistan army had advanced till then, that became what we call POK, what the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and what they call liberated Kashmir. 1/3 has gone to them, and 2/3 is with us. And then, came all kinds of problems. Kashmir is, feeling that they are not being treated equally. I think, if you look at the economics involved, Kashmir has been given much better benefit in comparison to many other Indian states. But the non-integration of Kashmir by imposing a condition that others should not buy land there, it has made them a secluded group. On the other hand, if you allowed others, to come and then purchase lands, in no time Kashmir would have been deprived for Kashmiris. So there should have been a balance. Like Malaysia, they have said that they call them Bhumi Putras. If you want to start a school there, industry there, anything there, the Bhumiputra has to be a partner. Otherwise, you cannot start. So that by doing that, they have protected the interests of the sons of the soil. If something like that was done, and then economically, if Kashmir was integrated, we would not have had the kind of problems, which we were having all these years. This 370 abrogation has become a very sensitive issue to the Kashmiri Muslims today. You will find it very interesting that the 370 was first proposed not as much by Kashmiri Muslims as like by the Kashmiri Pandits. They demanded this 370 status much more vociferously than the Muslims who are living there. Therefore, you can call it a demand of the Kashmiri spirit. They wanted some exclusiveness to them. Whether it is right or not, the government of India had accepted it at that point of time. And at this point of time, when we are having all kinds of problems with the Kashmir, Pakistan to contain its internal problem, they always throw the Kashmiri card at their own people, rouse the local sentiment, and then pass over all their shortcomings. So at this point of time, unless we succeed in bringing emotional integrity of the Kashmiris with the rest of India, any such measure will have its problem. And all governments till date have not succeeded in that job, bringing emotional integration of Kashmiris. There are ways and means to bring, giving them proper representation in civil services, make them proud partners now of industry, not only in Kashmir, but beyond Kashmir in India. Now, there are a number of measures which could have been contemplated and which could have been carried out also. Captains of industry, they are being told, please find out the Kashmiris who are nationalists in spirit, and then please bring them in here. A number of ways, we could have cultivated and we could have enhanced the strength of nationalist Kashmiris, which is what should have been done, which is what should be tried even at this point of time.
Sir, followed by Article 370, there are a lot of issues like house arrest of the politicians, internet shutdown, the curfew, and many other which is affecting the local life. What is your take on that, sir?
Yeah, if you have a curfew for such a long time, what does it mean? The act did not have support from the public. See, at times you will have to take a harsh stand, whether public likes it or not. You will have to take a harsh stand. But sooner than later, you will have to take the public into your side and then explain to them why it has been becoming necessary. And then another thing, this 370 abrogation when it was done, you see, in Kasauli in Himachal Pradesh, even in Karnataka in some areas, and in many tribal areas of India, outsiders cannot come and purchase land. But here what happened? Immediately after abrogation of 370, the political leaders were saying, now Hindi people, Telugu people, film producers, come and take your movies in Kashmir. So the Kashmir's mind was apprehensive. He thought others are going to come and take over. Industrialists will come and then they will buy land. If along with the abrogation of 370, simultaneously government had said, nobody will be able to buy land. Outsider will be able to buy land. The Kashmiri's right over his land is protected. Then we had a very great say. We had a great say telling the Kashmiris, we are not taking away your rights from you. And then we will also say that even in any industry that comes here, yes, a Kashmiri person should be one among the stakeholders. That's what they did even in the Red Indians, Native Americans areas. The American way of putting an end to ethnic strife is by just cleansing the ethnicity. So they killed as many Red Indians as possible. Ultimately, when the conscience became very great, the Supreme Court said, these, I don't remember the name, protected areas, now those areas, you cannot start any industry without the Native Americans being a stakeholder. So they started a lot of casinos there, the other Americans, and these people, they were made partners. Some stakeholding was given to them. The first generation, a lot of money came in. The first generation of Native Americans, what did they do? They became employees apart from the partnership. They became employees of the casino themselves. They all became drunkards, and then they had sugar and other complications. No, the first generation did not become employees. They just drank themselves to death. The second generation, they took the money and they also became small employees, employees of lower standard in those casinos. The third generation, taking the money, they became doctors, architects, and they spread out to the rest of US also. They became proud citizens. So we should study these systems and we should find out how much it can be made applicable, because no developmental scheme can be replicated 100% identically in any part, because the sociological factors are different. You have to take them into consideration. So you have to take these factors into consideration and find out how best to integrate the mind of the Kashmiris. Then I think Article 370 abrogation with the necessary safeguards would not have created this much of opposition.
Sir, about the criteria for reservation, sir, we have shifted from caste-based reservation to economic-based reservation, and there was a hue and cry for EWS. What is the take on the local criteria for reservation? So what is the problem with this criteria for reservation?
Listen, Constitution says socially and educationally backward people. That is the right thing. Now, if some castes continuously have been socially and educationally backward, then those castes will be included for reservation. Constitution talks about those people who are socially and educationally backward. And those people have to be encouraged. And there cannot be equal treatment to unequal people. And therefore, reservation was necessary. And this reservation cannot be perpetuated for two reasons. Government jobs are not the only point by which social equality will be established. It's important. Empowerment is important to start with. Therefore, for a few years, and then continuously you study, and then this reservation again, the forwards among backwards should not have enjoy all the rights, which is happening in many states in this reservation. And you should continuously engage yourself in studying what is the impact of reservation, and accordingly, it will be necessary to bring in reservation within reservation. That has been attempted in Andhra, in Tamil Nadu, they have, and in Kerala, they have attempted, and in scheduled caste reservation, there is a set of people in Tamil Nadu, the scavengers, they are called Arundhadiyars. It was found that the other two dominant communities within scheduled caste were having disproportionate benefit out of reservation, whereas this Arundhadiyars, the scavengers community, was not having adequate representation. Therefore, Tamil Nadu government provided 2% reservation to these people within those 18% exclusively, and by which some people were able to come up. And this has to be done. In North India, if you look at it, there was a feeling that the Yadavs and Kurmis took over everything. Therefore, the most politically also BJP, they were trying to cover up the most backward classes, because they were able to convince them, look, this present system of reservation doesn't help you. You see, this is the strength of democracy. First, you provide reservation commonly. Then within that group, some people, they find that they are not benefiting, and therefore they are fighting for it democratically, and their rights are recognized, and then reservation within reservation is provided. All this should be with an intention to ensure that inequality is removed by providing all this reservation over a period of time.
Sir, regarding this question hour in Parliament, they have cancelled the question hour in the Parliament due to pandemic.
Yeah.
So it is reducing the accountability. So what is the take on that, sir?
Yeah, you should oppose it. You should say that the voice of dissent will never be heard if there is no question hour. Will not be properly heard if there is no question hour. Question hour is one of the most important aspects of parliamentary proceedings. Therefore, government should find a time to have question hour. The endemic that we are facing today should be seen by the government as a challenge to be overcome. It should not be seen by the government as an opportunity to deprive the opposition from their legitimate demands. And my dear friends, if you give this answer, nobody is going to reduce your marks. Let me tell you. People who are there in UPSC, bureaucrats and professionals, they all aspire for Indian democracy to survive as a vibrant democracy. Therefore, if you have anything in mind, which is a correct thing, don't try to cover it up. Don't try to give a false answer. Say for what it is worth. But I have told you, you should have steel hands in velvet gloves. Your language should be polite, moderate. Your ideas can be firm. They need be firm in most of the times.
So any question related to judiciary, like judicial activism, overreach, or whether judiciary has become intolerant to the PILs, lot of PILs happening here. Because after PA, there was a actor who filed a PIL, sir. So there was a contempt of court and fine imposed on her. So is it judiciary becoming intolerant, or there was a sexual harassment case against CJI? So these judiciary related controversial question, how to answer, sir?
That particular case, I am told that actor was engaged in through Twitter or Facebook or something, simultaneously publicizing what she was doing. And therefore, the court thought that it was done for personal aggrandizement. She should have been more careful in conducting herself well. You see, there is a season for everything. PIL was a fashion once upon a time. Justice Bhagavati, he encouraged the PILs. He used to get even letters that he got as a judge. If he found a merit, he treated it as a PIL. And then he went. Now, over a period of time, I think people found this to be a very convenient weapon. Let us remember that for every one good user, there will be one or more bad users also. So when more and more of bad usage is seen, then the Supreme Court or courts, they become skeptical about PILs. Okay, but I think it's a temporary phenomenon and it should go. See, the courts are the last refuge for the common man to seek redressal of his grievances. Therefore, courts are expected to be more patient, towards the common man and more tolerant towards his ignorance and be firm in protecting the fundamental rights of the Indian citizens. That's what we want courts to be. That's all you can say. You cannot say these courts are bad. You cannot say it. Because the courts, again, one common rule is you cannot castigate an entire group as good or bad. One entire caste group, entire religious group, entire ethnic group, entire bureaucrats, entire judiciary as good or totally bad. It's always a mixture. There are good judgments and there are judgments which appear to be great to us. After the judgment is pronounced, we are at liberty to critically look at the judgments. That is a strength given to us, by our constitution and by our democracy. So we should be fearless in expressing our concerns about any judgment which we feel is not in tune with the democratic spirit of our constitution. That holds good for sexual harassment cases, etc. You should say that a person concerned should keep himself, rusticate himself very firmly. That is a basic requirement. That's what you should say.
Legalizing lesbian and gay marriage, are the society ready for it?
Pardon?
Sir, legalizing gay and lesbian marriage.
Yeah, it depends upon the maturity of the society. There are many societies, many countries where lesbianism and this one homosexuality has been recognized as non-offenses. So here also in India also, there are judgments. It depends on, you see, that's what I say, the cultural ethos of the country. In many cases, it is in contravention to the what is known as the rational beliefs about the privacy of an individual, about the independence of an individual. Now, these are changing also. They are not constant. There was a time when the third gender were considered great assets in the Mughal army. They were great warriors and great chieftains. And over a period of time, look how they have been dehumanized and how they had been treated. Now the situation is changing. The more and more awareness is coming about to protecting their rights and treating them decently. These things are coming now. It's a very difficult task because they have been pushed back to such a great extent that they themselves have started believing this is what our life is about. So to bring them up, to take them away from that harsh reality, it's a tough task. But then steps have started being taken about it. The same is true about lesbianism and other things. Part of the world believes that why should we interfere with an individual's choices of life? And in India also, there is a small but very firm group which feels and believes in that. And it has to slowly, the society has to look at these issues and resolve.
So one last question, sir, about the three-language policy. Even the North Indian people wants to know whether, because there is in constitution, we want to promote a Hindi language, but it is in a controversy with the southern states. How to answer such a question, sir?
You see, the three-language formula, in my opinion, is a good formula. What was envisaged was the Southerners will learn Hindi and the Northerners will learn any one of the Indian languages, with both sides learning English as well. But in reality, what happened in states like UP and Bihar, no Southern language was taught, and they did not bother about English because in Hindi you can write in those days, you can write exams only in English and Hindi, UPSC exams. So you can write in Hindi, and then there are a large section of the country, Bihar, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh. In all these areas, if you know Hindi, you can travel to any of these places. You can seek employment in any of these places. Therefore, it became one language formula there in reality. Now, the Southerners had their resentment. Now, as such for Southerners, when the UPSC medium was only English and Hindi, they had to learn one additional language, namely English or Hindi, as the case may be. But the Northerners did not need to learn. Now the UPSC has relaxed, and then they have said that in all the regional languages also you can write. Now, this is a touchy issue. You see, look at the European Parliament. When they were trying to form European Parliament, the biggest employment was given to the translators and interpreters. Every document was translated to all the languages prevalent. Now, in India, the nation, the states have been demanding that all these national languages should be declared national languages. Whether that be done or not, the Staff Selection Commission, when they conduct the regional examinations, to take everybody along with them, such examinations should also be conducted in the regional languages. Now, small things, your nationalized banks, in the past, they used to write the deposit slip, debit slip, etc. It used to be in Hindi and the local Franco. If it is Karnataka, it will be Hindi and Kannada. If it is Tamil Nadu, it will be Hindi and Tamil. Now, recently I am told that it is found only in Hindi. Now, this kind of thing is best avoided. Karnataka was never an anti-Hindi agitating state. But recently, we find people expressing their concern about it. More and more people are agitating about it. This has to stop. India is a union of states. Therefore, the states' sentiments need be given due respect. And if that is not done, as I told you, you can have either unity or uniformity. Uniformity is impose Hindi or Sanskrit or Tamil throughout this country. You impose it. Then you will not have unity. There will be dissensions, there will be resentments. Therefore, if you want unity in this country, it's better not to impose uniformity. Don't impose it. See, if Tamilian has got such a great business opportunities outside the country by learning English, more than business opportunity, a hard job, IT jobs, in England, then US, Canada, they have gone big, and 3 generations have gone and they have made a lot of money. But if they learn Hindi, if they find that there are enough commercial opportunities, those who find commercial opportunities by learning Hindi in Tamil Nadu or learning Hindi, therefore leave it to them. Over a period of time, you will find that the integration will take place. When people believe that by learning Hindi, this government will not undermine my native language. It will not undermine Telugu or Kannada or Odia or Bengali or Tamil. If that belief comes, that belief can come only by the union government making a conscious effort to develop all the Indian languages proportionately. If that is done, then the fear about one language dominating others, I think will not be there.
Thank you, sir. Now, winding time, sir. I request any of the student to give a vote of thanks to sir.
No, more than vote of thanks, you tell me what you feel about this session.
Yes,
If
sir.
you think
Yes.
something is missing,
Yes, sir.
I think see, Mr. Balachandran, after 35 years in government, he is just buttering the government. You
Sir,
are
it's great.
very welcome. No, you are very welcome to say it.
Sir, I wonder how you can read and keep abreast of all the information. It's mind blowing, and for a faculty as such, it can be done. But for a bureaucrat who have retired, it's really great learning that we have to be learning a lot.
Which means I can appear for the civil service exam this year.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I
The
request
students.
Ankur to give out a feedback of the. Ankur, can you? Ankur, please unmute yourself.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
First of all, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for this insightful discussion on these topics, because many of these topics were continuously appearing in few mock interviews we appeared as well. And I'm from Haryana, and the farmer agitation issue and the issue of job reservation, because 75% reservation was done by Haryana in private jobs, and the issue with regard to the questionnaire and the judiciaries. So these issues were very common in the most of the mock interviews. And what we used to do, very biased side we used to take, like always supporting the government, but a biased, unbiased and central point, which you told was very helpful. And thank you, sir. Okay, ma'am.
Welcome. Yes, Madhavi, open to you. Over to you.
Yes, sir. With your permission, sir, I'll tell them about the next session and.
Sure.
Okay, sir. It's great having you, sir. Really, thank you, sir.
So you are going to discuss with them their needs where my presence is not required, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
Then I will leave. Yes, all of you, I wish you best of luck. That you have crossed main exam makes it very clear that you can cross your interview, your YOC. Now, I am not satisfied with you getting selected in the civil service examination. I will be happy when you score as high a mark as possible in your YOC. So remember what I said. Appear to follow the golden mean, but be very firm in your opinion in the most polite language, and be honest to yourself. Don't give a dishonest answer. That's all. All the best. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so
sir.
much, sir.
Welcome. I'm leaving.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Regarding the next session, we have in store.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm unable to share. Yeah. This is tomorrow we have Shivasalam, sir, and I'll show you the questions what I have for Shivasalam, sir. Then we have 23rd. It is with Jawahar, sir, who will be talking about the all digital controversy. And then we have in 24th, we have Santosh Babu sir again with the e-governance problems and all. And then we have two IPS officer who is actually Anup Jaishwal IPS and Shri Madhu Nair IPS, who will all discuss about internal security and law and order issues separately. And so I'm now showing you the yes, the question that we have for Shivaselam sir. Please mute yourself.
Ma'am, one request, ma'am.
Yes, go on.
Ma'am, can you please arrange one session on foreign related aspects also? Like
Yes, we have our Beno Zephin who can actually give out more light on that. So I thought I will reserve those questions which are related to foreign relations later. So the, she can actually address those questions in a more better manner. And here we have the questions for Sivaselam sir. It is regarding the topic ethical competency. So misuse of laws, misgovernance. Actually, I had a question about UPA and sedition to him. But since you guys asked me, so I posted to Balachandran sir itself. So again, misgovernance that is COVID in UP. And then the cases against the social media problem, NRC issue, and corruption, public interest litigation for publicity. These questions I had for Shivaselam sir. So you can actually post more question on Telegram. I will also ask, and also in the Zoom session live. Thank you, friends.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, I would like to make a request, ma'am. Few of us are
Yes.
actually working professional, and the timing of the session actually clashes with our work.
Yes.
So could you please provide a recording session of this, the recording of the sessions as well?
Yes, Bharat Singh, we will. Okay, we wanted you to excel, and it is better you join live, but it's okay if you are unable to do it. We actually want you to get the inputs from the session, so we will share the
Okay.
recorded videos. So
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
the purpose will be solved. Okay.
ma'am, one more thing. Ma'am,
Yes.
what about the online mocks and the one-to-one sessions?
Online mocks will be every Saturday and Sunday. I'm bit busy with this schedule, so I'll be getting the dates of the bureaucrats, and then we will schedule it every Saturday and Sunday throughout this program. So every Saturday, Sunday, there will be 10 persons going for a mock, and these are the panel members that we have the special session with. So you will have it.
Ma'am, and is there a limitation of number of mocks which we can attend, or?
Yes, because of the due to the lot of demands, we will be providing only one mock for each person.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
But friends, I wanted to mention you, if you have any questions or if you want your answers to be corrected, even your attire to be corrected, please send it to me. I'll be able to get it corrected with the bureaucrats. Or if, as the faculty, if you have questions and answers, I can actually help you. If I have no knowledge of it, I'll ask my other faculty to also correct it. So we will be able to guide you in that aspect.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Ma'am, I'm sorry for this question, but where can we connect to you? I have no idea. I'm really sorry.
I'm there in Telegram. I'm there in. You can actually mail it to R&D Kingmakers. Okay.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So thank you, friends. I'm ending the session.